Did you see any white people in there waiting an hour and 32 minutes for a plate of spaghetti? Huh? And how many cups of coffee did we get?
You don't drink coffee, and I didn't want any.
Man, that woman in there poured cup after cup to every single white person around us. But did she even ask you if you wanted any?
We didn't get any coffee that you didn't want and I didn't order, and that's evidence of racial discrimination. Did you notice that our waitress was black?
And black women don't think in stereotypes?
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cinema Psych Podcast. The podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and we are going to be talking about a weird kind of movie in history, we'll say, in modern cinema history. That film is Crash. Came out in 2004, and it won the Best Oscar. Or I should say, the Best Picture Oscar for that year. And I gotta say, it has audiences divided, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna get into some of the reasons about that today with our guest host. So if you haven't seen Crash, or maybe you just didn't really pay attention to who won the Best Oscar, I did it again, who won the Best Picture Oscar in 2004 or February 2005, but Crash came out, and it's wrote and directed by Paul Haggis, and it's got a huge cast. I think that was one of the big things going with it. So we've got Don Cheadle, we've got Sandy Bullock, we got Thandwe Newton, who formerly went by Tandy Newton, Matt Dillon, Jennifer Esposito, Brendan Fraser, where has he been? Terrence Howard, Ludacris. Yep, that Ludacris. Michael Pena. He's my favorite character in the whole movie. Ryan Phillippe, in a role that he was literally born to play, probably, and Lorenz Tate. So lots and lots of people, and then there's some like other bit actors, like William Fichtner's in it, Keith David's in it. Whew. Anyway, the movie follows this large ensemble cast through a couple of day period, about a 1 or so day period in LA, following two LAPD officers, Matt Dillon and Ryan Phillippe, a TV director and his wife, who have a run-in with the LAPD, and a Middle Eastern man who I think he's Persian, who has a connection with Michael Pena's character, and I think Michael Pena's character's name is Daniel Ruiz, and the two main antagonists, I guess we'll say, in the movie, sort of drivers of conflict, Ludacris and Lorenz Tate, play carjackers, and Lorenz Tate's character is Don Cheadle's detective character's brother. And we find out how all of these stories are connected in this movie, and it all has to do with a series of crashes, how these different people come together and crash into one another, and in some ways literal, but in most ways metaphorical, of course, and we will explore that in this episode, so stay tuned. We're going to jump right in it. My guest host today is Dr. Carina Malavanti. Carina is a senior lecturer of psychology and neuroscience at Baylor University. Prior to coming to Baylor, she was an assistant professor at a small liberal arts university in Tennessee, where she was honored with the Research, Advising, and Student Advocacy Awards. It's a hard one to say. At Baylor, she has been recognized for excellence in teaching. She teaches introductory courses in psychology and neuroscience and upper level courses in cognition, perception, and film. My favorite, Carina, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be here.
I am so happy to have you on because it's been a while since we've had a cog and neuro person on, and I must say it's been a long time coming for you to be on the show. So, as I do with all of my guests, regardless of where you sit on the film loving spectrum, before we jump into our main topic of Crash tonight, I did want to pick your brain a little bit on your thoughts on film in general, films, going to movies, that sort of thing. And because I know you have a little tidbit up your sleeve here, why do you use film in your teaching?
So I love using film. Anytime I have student-led discussion sections, one of the really neat parts of my job at Baylor is that I can teach upper level courses that are pretty small, in between 14 to 28 students, I would say, each section. And because of that, these classes are really rich for discussion. So film is a kind of a natural way for us to get into discussion and to, empower students to come prepared to discuss film and to come up with more examples than what they're seeing. So I like to use film in social psychology courses, cognition courses, psychology and film. That class, I get to completely just use film. And I think with appropriate content warnings and dedicated student leaders, and they get to pick their own movies, so they're really excited about it. I found film to be pretty powerful for talking about the human condition. Yeah, I was just about to say, even when parts of film can be problematic or can be controversial, students are pretty adept at picking up the nuances.
I'm so glad you brought that last bit up because, the last two bits. So the tidbit that I was teasing there was psych and film, of course, was psych and film. And of course, anytime somebody is on this show, psych and film, we're going to have to stop and talk about it for a second. So we'll do that in just a second. And then the last part that you said that, films can be problematic. And it's essentially a learning experience, an immersive learning experience for how different people perceive the human condition, put it on film, and then we as viewers get to pick that apart. And of course, the ones that are problematic, like some might think Crash is, they can look through it, and that gives them a chance to critically analyze a piece of fiction. So, I mean, that's a great way to look at it. So, back to psych and film. So, I want to pick your brain a little bit more about this before we jump into Crash. So, what led you to jump at the chance to do psych and film course at Baylor? And what kind of things do you have them do in this class?
So, I don't pretend to be a film buff at all, but I love watching TV and film. And so this was an opportunity of somebody who had retired, and this was kind of an unmanned course when I got to Baylor. Mm-hmm. And the department chair kind of was saying, like, if anybody wants to pick up this course, I know that students will take it. And it has never not filled. We always have students that are excited to take this course. And it actually is not included in our psychology major. So our students take this completely as an elective course.
Yes, that's awesome. And what kind of things do you do in the course as they go through the semester?
Oh, we do so many cool things. So we, sometimes do this class face-to-face pre-pandemic. But even in the online space, we've been able to do this pretty well. But I have students, I give kind of a roster or a repository of films that students can choose. I give them the IMDb blurb for it, the ratings, how long they are. They get to choose what film they're going to come in with at least 10 discussion questions, and they're going to lead completely the class discussion on it. Of course, I screen their questions as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And I also have students do their own analysis project outside of participating in class discussions and leading class discussions. So they will, on their own time, screen a film and present a presentation on that film and let us know a little bit more about the skills they picked up in our class through the discussions, but also, just to let us know a little bit more about some of the really neat films that they're watching.
That's really cool. And they get to choose whatever they want for the second one. So not from a pre-screened list or a pre-provided list. Oh, I love that, because that's where you get some of like the real indie crushes or some anime or other things like that really, don't make it into classic Western film lists, of course. And I imagine there's probably the occasional foreign language film.
Yes. Oh. All of those. I've had all of those show up in that project. It's pretty much the final exam project for our class, and the students then peer review and evaluate. And I just love when they're able to hear their fellow peer be super excited about a film and what they learned.
I love that film class. And I got to say, if I would probably make it my mission to watch every single film that was part of that second project. And so I think I'd be watching new films over and over. So many. Be like, that's a new one, add it to the list. Oh, that's a new one, add it to the list.
And Alex, if I can interject, I mean, my husband is a film buff and he loves the student recommendations.
Oh, yes, that is awesome. Excellent. Yeah, that'd be a slippery slope for me, because I mean, like your experience, it would be a complete. So when I teach it, it's a complete elective, and it would fill up because of just how awesome of an idea it is.
Yes, absolutely.
So now that we've talked a little bit about that kind of stuff, get the listeners where we are at, let's talk about why Crash was on your radar for this episode. So what are the reasons for our discussion of Crash today?
So I actually love assigning Crash in a couple of different courses. I'm not a film buff, as I said before, but I do love ensemble casts on TV shows and in movies, because I think they can highlight multiple storylines really well and in a way that's different than most typical stories. So one of the reasons why I enjoy using this particular film is that it highlights so well multiple complex stories. And when your overall goal is for students to better understand themselves and others, film in general, but also this film in particular, I think kind of challenges us to do that. So this movie does a really good job of kind of showing how mind and behavior can be incredibly complicated. And no one ends up being 100% quote unquote good in this movie. There is no unflawed character. We're all imperfect and we're all trying to do our best in a world and in a system that's flawed, and particularly for people of color.
Yeah. 100% agree, and especially about the good moniker. It's wild when every single main character in an ensemble like this says one thing at least that you're just like, oh my god, did they just say that? Oh, and it leaves you like really. I don't know, taken aback, I suppose, aghast at the fact that those kinds of moments in an ensemble film like this really take redeeming qualities out of every single character, and even ones that you did think were redeeming are now washed away. And of course, this brings us directly into the sort of elephant in the room with respect to Crash, which is it's not a popular film for a lot of reasons. And it's a controversial film among psychologists like you and I because of its depiction of many aspects. So I want to jump into wade into some of the psychological concepts in the movie, so we can sort of better understand this controversy while also sort of ignoring the fact that, maybe it shouldn't have won Best Picture Oscar. Because even though it's, I think, decently acted, it's a bit over the top. It's I suppose it could have been better if it had been maybe a mini series.
Yeah, I agree with you with that.
So what are, Carina, what are the ideas, the main psychological ideas that a film like Crash can be used for?
So just from the onset, right, we know that we're going to be talking about group dynamics and stereotypes, prejudice. We're going to be talking about in-group and out-group, microaggressions, systemic racism. So there are just so many topics that can be touched on this film. And it really, the way that you approach this film as a psychology educator might depend on the class that you're teaching it in. It might depend on your student interest. And so I have seen this conversation go many different ways in these classes.
Okay. Yeah. So let's take, I would say, let's take the big one here, which is racial prejudice. We could take it in order here: racial stereotypes, racial prejudice, and then discrimination, racial discrimination. So we have a set of characters that all intertwine, right? So one of the biggest racial stereotypes, I'll say one of the big racial, maybe not the biggest racial stereotype, is Sandra Bullock's character. She plays the wife of the district attorney who's trying to get reelected. They get carjacked, and instead of, dealing with the trauma in a more appropriate way, she goes on a bit of a tirade, and pretty much all nine non-white groups thrown under the bus. No real remorse.
Listen to police calls?
I need to talk to you for a second.
You just give me a minute, all right? Find Flanagan, will you? Now.
Yes, sir.
Yes, hi?
I want the locks changed again in the morning.
You want? Look, why don't you just go lie down, huh? Have you checked on James?
Well, of course I've checked on James. I've checked on him every 5 minutes since we've been home. Do not patronize me. I want the locks changed again in the morning.
Shh, it's okay. Just go to bed, all right?
You know what? Didn't I just ask you not to treat me like a child?
I'm sorry, Miss Jean. It's okay, I go home now.
It's fine. Thank you very much for staying, Maria.
You're welcome, no problem. Good night, Miss Jean.
Good night.
We'll see you tomorrow.
I would like the locks changed again in the morning. And you know what? You might mention that we'd appreciate it if next time they didn't send a gang member.
A gang member?
Yes.
What, you mean that kid in there?
Yes, the guy in there with the shaved head, the pants around his ass,
come on.
the prison tattoo.
Those are not prison tattoos.
Oh, really? And he's not gonna go sell our key to one of his gangbanger friends the moment he is out our door.
We've had a really tough night. I think it'd be best if you just went upstairs right now.
And what, wait for them to break in? I just had a gun pointed in my face.
You lower your voice.
And it was my fault because I knew it was gonna happen. But if a white person sees two black men walking towards her and she turns and walks in the other direction, she's a racist, right? Well, I got scared and I didn't say anything, and 10 seconds later, I had a gun in my face. Now, I am telling you, your amigo in there is gonna sell our key to one of his homies, and this time it'd be really f***ing great if you acted like you actually gave a shit.
Upon rewatching that scene, I was like, she'd be called a Karen these days.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I feel, rewatching this film, I do get a lot of new feelings. Every time I watch it. Actually, my husband remarked the other day, how many times have you watched this film? A lot. But when I rewatch her character in particular, I feel like some some of my students would identify with some of what she was saying.
Mhm.
The fact that like I was scared and I didn't say anything, and then look what happened. And, with this racial reckoning that we've been having in the US, I do think that sometimes we have that type of um, acknowledgement of, wow, like I did feel, I do have some of these stereotypes, and I do have some of these prejudicial actions that occur. And, what do I do with those feelings when I know that they're wrong? In her case, she didn't acknowledge it. And it really, there's not a lot of redemption for her in this movie at all. But it does make me a little sad to kind of see it every time.
Yeah, and again, this takes me back to something a little bit longer. I don't think we really get much closure with her at all.
Right.
Because she's now no longer central to the story. She sort of drives Daniel Ruiz's his story.
Right.
And so yeah, she's just left as this really bigoted person. And we get nothing else from her. And it's a really strange role for Sandra Bullock to take, but I can imagine. And then so when we don't get closure, and then as you said, some people might feel validated by her experience, they don't actually get the learning that would generally come from a character like that's journey,
Right.
With the conflict resolution and all that stuff. And so she becomes this one-dimensional character, and that is one of the biggest criticisms of this movie,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
So Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote when the film came out that the film is considered by him to be shallow. That none of the there's some gender there's some gender and sexism stuff, but it's mostly the racial makeup of Los Angeles. And he said that nobody's racist stuff is reckoned with. It's all just left out there on the table. Nothing comes of it.
I do feel that when this movie was released, in the early 2000s, and Obama, was about to be elected, I think that the US was thinking, we are in this post-racial world. Nobody out there is actually acting like, quote unquote, these people in the film. And, I think that, again, watching this film, more than 10 years, 15 years. Oh my gosh, it's been a really long time since this movie has been made.
Yeah, 2004.
Yeah. So it's been a really long time since this movie has been out there. And it hurts me to say this, but I kind of think that we are, in this last couple of years, we actually do see some of this happen a little bit more than we would have considered in that mid 2000s. What do you think?
Yeah, that is a great point. And that's the main reason why I thought Sandra Bullock just reminded me of Karen, just listening to her tirade. So, that's a last 2 or 3 year meme. But I think you're right. This idea of this post-racial society, we're, Rodney King, 1992, Can't We All Just Get Along, which also features heavily the LAPD. This idea that, Bill Clinton was able to bring everybody together, bring everybody to the table, and we got this, and 9/11, we're one America kind of thing. And I think the Academy gave this one Best Picture because the Academy wanted to feel better about itself.
Yeah. And the Academy has not done a lot of things to feel good about itself, even recently. So maybe they needed to win that year.
They needed a feel-good story of the year. Yeah, because, Nothing's redeemable about these characters, as we said. They all say something awful or do something awful. And even though Ludacris's character has a redemptive action in the end when he drives the Cambodian refugees, which were being trafficked,
Right.
sorry. He drives to Chinatown and lets them free, but the only reason that was able to occur was because he ran over a Korean man, dropped him at a hospital, and before that, hijacked a car at gunpoint. So, yeah, I don't know if the last action absolves the previous two. From an omniscient standpoint, as the viewer, maybe you grant that to him because you know about how the Korean guy was a trafficker. But if you're actually place yourself actually in the shoes of Ludacris, not only would it be ludicrous, but I don't know if you get to be like, I did great today. Time to go steal another car.
Right. My heart always, almost explodes when he does release them, because the other choice in that decision, in that specific decision, was to make money off of, even though he hadn't been part of the original trafficking, he could have made money, and he was trying to make money.
Yeah.
And I was, at least then he had some kind of conscience, but, and so I that feeling, though, that my heart explodes, like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy he let them go, is exactly what the Academy wanted. It's like, oh, of course they're going to end up with, he let them go. And that's a feel-good part of the movie. But you're right. You can't take that without also regarding everything else.
Right. Same thing with Ryan Phillippe's character, who has the exact opposite arc to his character, because he is unhappy with Matt Dillon's behavior, especially toward Terrence Howard and Tandwi Newton's character. I really hope I'm saying the new pronunciation of her name right. She recently, I don't know if you know this, Carina, but she recently changed her name to be more in line with the original spelling and meaning of her name.
Oh, that's fantastic. I did not know that.
Yeah. And so it's pronounced slightly differently. And I don't know if I've heard it properly since she's done that. I don't think it's been in the last year or so. But in any case, Matt Dillon's character is a really, really bigoted, very individualistic and selfish police officer, even though he does rescue her in the middle of the movie. He sexually assaults her during a frisk.
It is absolutely 100%, I think, the hardest part of the movie to watch.
Oh, yeah. Hands down. I would say a close second is Michael Peña's character's daughter almost getting shot by a gun, and a man thinking that another person was stealing from him. And
I mean, it was just, yes,
those moments. But back to Ryan Phillippe's opposite arc to Ludacris's character. So he's not happy with that. He tries to go to his boss. His boss says, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm a black man. I've worked my ass off and followed the rules. And he's talking about the unwritten rules about being a police officer. And it's historic creation to be a slave roundup organization. And he's like, I'm not going to risk that. I'm not going to do that for you, a rookie. I'm going to ruin my career. Nor and it would probably ruin your career too. So, shut up. Keep your mouth shut.
I don't want to cause any problems, Lieutenant. I just want a new partner.
Oh, I understand. Your partner's a racist prick, but you don't want to stir up any bad feelings with him.
Well, he's been on the force for a long time,
17 years.
and I do have to work here, sir.
So, you don't mind that there's a racist prick on the force. You just don't want him to ride in your car.
If you need me to go on record about this, sir, I will.
That'd be great. Write a full report. Because I'm anxious to understand how an obvious bigot could have gone undetected in this department for 17 years. 11 of which he was under my personal supervision, which doesn't speak very highly of my managerial skills. But that's not your concern. I can't wait to read it.
What if I said I wanted a new partner for personal reasons?
So now you're saying he's not a racist prick, you just don't like him.
Yes, sir.
That's not a good enough reason.
Well, then I guess I should think of a better one and get back to you.
So you think I'm asking you to make one up?
No, sir. I just can't think of one right now.
You want to know what I heard? I heard it was a case of uncontrollable flatulence.
You want me to say yes, flatulence?
Not him, you. You have uncontrollable flatulence, and you're too embarrassed to ride with anybody else, so you're requesting a one-man car.
I'm not comfortable with that, Lieutenant.
I wouldn't be either. Which is why I understand your need for privacy. Just like I'm sure you understand how hard a black man has to work to get to, say, where I am, in a racist fucking organization like the LAPD. And how easily that can be taken away. Now, that being said, it's your decision. You can put your career and mine on the line in pursuit of a just cause. Or you can admit to having an embarrassing problem of a personal nature.
Yeah, and I think he pretty much says, what would it say about me if I had known about this behavior and let it go on for so long?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly the kind of, like selfish, I'm only looking after number one kind of behaviors. And you can say this movie doesn't depict true, or at least adjacent prejudicial encounters, but I think many of these situations are not far from the truth. Maybe they're caricatures of them, and they could have been handled a little bit better. Of course, I'll say they could have been handled much better, but in a 2-hour movie, you're not going to get that.
Right. Film, if we're just talking about film and TV, it's really hard to flesh out that nuance sometimes. And in a 2-hour movie, you just got to go for it, I guess.
Yeah, a nuance. That's a perfect word, because that's all we're hearing about these days is incredible nuance associated with all of these topics, and 2-hour movie is not going to get to the nuance, and the nuance is good. We need the discussion of the nuance, and it is.
We live in the nuance.
What was that?
We live in the nuance.
Exactly, we live in the nuance. So whether you're on the side, I guess my point is, whether you're on the side of this movie is sort of it shouldn't be used because it doesn't depict it well enough, or you're on the side, well, even if it doesn't depict it well enough, it's still a learning experience. It's always going to be a learning experience, and maybe be somewhere in the middle and point it out.
Absolutely. And I think that's where I live. Anytime I'm using these films, I am wondering, what are students taking out of these films? Is there a way that I can help them flesh out the nuance? And what are the ways that we can talk about psychology within this film, whether it's portrayed accurately, what's portrayed not as accurately? What if this movie was made now? How could directors flesh out this nuance in today's world as well?
And I think that one is definitely, that last question is a clearer answer the farther out we get from the kind of world that we lived in 2003, 2004 versus the world we live in almost 20 years later. And I think there is a marked difference using this film to discuss racism, systemic racism, biases, stereotypes, prejudice, all of those ideas in a film like this is a much better film to do it in, because you can almost take these vignettes, as we'll do here in a few minutes. You almost take these little vignettes and explore just the little things about those vignettes. If you're in, say, like a content course. So again, it's better to use a film like this with its vignettes than to go, okay, let's go all the way back to the beginning of film and film history. And here I'll play you 1915 D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, where it has a clear message of one side is right, one side is wrong. Of course, you can imagine which sides D.W. Griffith would have done. The white side, versus a filmmaker like Paul Haggis, who made it an intentional decision to not give any of these characters any sort of redeeming qualities, and the character that is built up to be somehow a hero ends up being one of the other villains, Ryan Phillippe's character, because he shoots Lorenz Tate, who ultimately is another detective's brother. That whole story there, and
was unarmed.
Yeah, and unarmed, and also it's something majorly in common. Both carrying around the Saint of a medallion, right? Saint
Christopher's.
Yeah. Yep. Saint Christopher, but the actual man, right? A figurine. It was a figurine.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Yes, I completely agree with everything you just said. And I hope that we as psychology educators are helping our students flesh this out as well.
So we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back from the break with Dr. Carina Malavanti, we are going to dissect some of those vignettes in some of the other kinds of classes that you might see this course in. So stick around. We'll be right back. Howdy. Thanks for listening to this episode. We hope you're enjoying the conversation. Over the past 2 years, the podcast has grown, and that's mostly in part to folks like you, the listeners. We've also had wonderful luck receiving support from the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, APA Division II Small Partnerships Grant. It's been a fun ride, and we want to keep it going. So we need your help. There are several ways that you can support this show. You can share episodes with your social media networks so we can grab new listeners. You can join our fledgling Patreon program. You can contribute directly using PayPal, or you can purchase some sweet merchandise with our logo at our Spreadshirt merch store. All of those things can be found on the website cinemapsychpod.swanpsych.com. But perhaps the best thing that you can do is to keep listening and leave us feedback on Facebook or Twitter so we know you've listened. Thanks. And now back to the show. And we are back with Dr. Carina Malavanti talking about Crash, the 2004 film directed and written by Paul Haggis, on huge ensemble cast. And in this segment, Carina, I wanted to take your idea of different classes and sort of talk about the vignettes in as examples of these various concepts and terms you might see represented in the film. So since we're both cognitive and neuro folks, I thought it might be a good idea to start with the things that we know and go on from there. I know the two of us are sort of journey persons in the courses that we teach. So we can get it all, folks. Don't worry about it. But I think we'll start with our bread and butter first. So the biggest thing I think one could grab from a cognitive perspective in this film is the C in the ABC model of aggression, of prejudice, or of in groups and out groups and group dynamics and all of these kinds of things, and that is stereotypes. So the C, cognition, these would be stereotypes. And these would be stereotypes that we immediately think of when encountering different people, whether they are in our in-group and out-group. So what are some of the vignettes that really shape these implicit stereotypes that you see in the film?
Yeah, so I think this whole film has has so many different vignettes or scenes that have stereotypes that are depicted. But just from the get-go, if we're talking about Jean's character and the way that she speaks about Hispanic people, and the locksmith, it's and her housekeeper is there as well, and can hear it, and that's a very easy one for us to dissect right from the get-go.
Yeah. So and her husband's right there trying to smooth over the whole thing, like, what? No, what are you saying these things? And it's very clear that Jean, Sandra Bullock, has no respect for either of those two people.
Right. I mean, and even one of the attorney general, her husband's coworkers there, who is Black, and she's also includes Black people in her tirade as well. And it's just, wow, it's just a lot. And he does try to identify with, wow, a lot has happened tonight. And she immediately just shuts him down.
Yeah, tells him to stop treating her like a child, which is sort of a projection stereotype, I felt like, because the way that he was acting, she was perceiving it as him treating her like a child, but he was just trying to calm her down. So I think it's quite interesting. One stereotype that I found interesting in the movie was Farhad's character. I believe that is the character name. His stereotype was thinking that, again, being in Los Angeles is quite heavily Hispanic. Having grown up there myself, I can attest to that. And he has this idea of that, this Latino is going to steal his stuff because he's a locksmith and he could break into his safe or whatever. And he's just like, no.
Excuse me, sir?
You finish?
I replaced the lock, but you got a real problem with that door.
You fixed the lock?
No, I replaced the lock, but you gotta fix that door.
Just fix the lock.
Sir, listen to me. What you need is a new door.
I need new door?
Yeah.
Okay. How much?
Sir, you're gonna have to call somebody that sells doors.
You tried to cheat me, right? Huh? You have a friend that fixed door?
Nah, I don't have a friend that fixes doors, bro.
Then go and fix the fucking lock, you cheater.
You know what? Why don't you just pay for the lock and I won't charge you for the time?
You don't fix the lock, I pay? But you think I'm stupid? You fix the fucking lock, you cheater.
Hey, I'd appreciate if you stop calling me names.
Then fix the fucking lock.
I replaced the lock! You gotta fix the door!
You cheat! You cheater!
Fine. Don't pay.
What?
Have a good night.
What? No! Wait! You come back here! You fix the lock! Come here, you fix my lock! Fix the fucking lock!
But he takes it too far. And then there's the viewer stereotype represented here. So an American stereotype gets represented quite drastically on this Farhad character, because then he is completely mashed as a Persian man into the broader Middle Eastern stereotype of a paranoid, violent, but strong belief in God through Islam, one-dimensional character, and again his only redemption is the fact that he did not accidentally kill anyone.
Right. I mean, I think that is one of the stereotypes that I found really hard to talk about. I mean, if I'm being honest, when we are talking about just a few years after 9/11,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that so many people were putting all Persian people, all Middle Eastern people into one group, the out group, one group, them, not us being American. That was really hard for our friends, that were not, part of any kind of group or anything close to anybody that would hurt us. And so we do see that. And because there is no redemption for this character, and there is no one even trying, really, besides his daughter and his wife, there's no one even trying to help him. And he's really a victim of circumstance and all the things that have gone wrong at his store, all of the robberies, and he's just really trying to survive, like we all are. That is a very challenging part of the movie for me.
Yeah, because it leaves the viewer with a single lasting impression, other than the lead up to it. He is left as a caricature, as I said before. He's left as a shell of a representation of a vast group of very different people that cannot be lumped together. And yet, as you said, just a few years after 9/11, it was still being done, even in the, we'll call it tossaliad of places like Los Angeles, right? Very multicultural city. And even though there are lots of places of institutional segregation, in and around this vast area, like it's a pretty spread out city, that we take this one character, or Paul Haggis takes this one character and just shrinks him all the way down. And that's what you're left with. Right.
And at least, for a lot of the other groups of people, we have multiple representations. So we have a couple of different representations of Hispanic individuals, a couple of different representations for Black individuals, but we only have just the one, really, because they don't do, I think, the daughter justice as well.
No, they just, I feel like they cast someone who could do nagging pretty well. Yeah, but they don't give her enough. They don't give her enough to do and enough to prevent. But then again, we always have to come back to the don't have enough time. But
right,
that of course comes down to a film decision rather than a psych decision. Of course, we can't be Paul Haggis. So we're kind of stuck with that. So you brought up like in-group, out-group biases, and one of the things I've been doing recently is preparing for my great courses. So coming up with research on cognitive biases for this course that I'm writing. And I'm doing stereotypes, and I'm specifically talking about some of these in-group and out-group biases. And one that is particularly pronounced in the film is the out-group bias, which they're depending on what context you're talking in, can be a little nuanced in its definition. But the specific one that I'm thinking of is the one that I did the most reading on, which was the out-group bias is this homogenous group with no nuanced differences. They all look the same, insert group here, X looks the same, blah, 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 or sounds the same, or dresses the same. There is no differences among this group. Everyone is the same. And so if you see, going to the kernel of truth hypothesis, if you observe one of these members do something negative, then you attribute that whole negative thing because of this one observation to the entire group. And if you do that often, you create these illusory correlations. And of course, it just confirms, then, using another bias, it confirms every time you see somebody act this way, it confirms that previous stereotype. And because the group is homogenous, you don't see anyone for their individualness, their behavior. You see them as the group doing the one behavior. They're not personified. They don't have their own agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think that we have a couple of different instances of that in this film. The one that is coming to mind right now was actually just spoken about, and it was when Don Cheadle's character was being told about his brother's file and the third strike. And the way that individual, and I'm forgetting exactly what he was to the Attorney General, but he worked in the Attorney General's office. And he was saying, man, he had the same chances as you did. But it came across as extremely belittling to his family and to his race. And, I think we could expound on that a lot. But he also said something like, don't we need a hero to come out of this? And that part struck me as really interesting. It's not just an example of how the system sometimes can be flawed in the pursuit of justice, right? They were trying to get something, trying to get justice for a Black man that had died and had been gunned down. But in that same way, they were pressuring Don Cheadle's character. And I think that part of that was, this stereotype that all Black people were doing drugs, and that was also the reason why his brother had been in so much trouble. And I thought that was actually that always for my students is a topic, is a conversation starter. It's a topic that they really want to dive into because my students are really interested in legal psychology and psychology in the law and we're law and order and how do we use this in context. And so, when we use those kinds of stereotypes in that way, then we're going to have some problems. And so, that outgroup bias was strong in that depiction.
Yeah, I love that. I love that one. And I think that's the only story that really has that much depth is Don Cheadle's character and how sort of his arc connects the whole group of people together. I will say that his character is the one that connects the whole thing together because he was a producer on the movie. So yeah, of course his character is going to be the one that gets to carry the connection all the way through. And you're absolutely right about that being a real good depiction of outgroup bias there. One that I was thinking of, well, I go back to, I feel like Michael Peña's Daniel Ruiz character got the brunt of it. And I think there is some I don't know, some implicit bashing on the inhabitants of Mexican California before settlers moved in and colonists moved in and sort of changed the nature of the game. And some latent, like, real strong. And growing up in LA, you do hear this a lot, and it's actually kind of interesting. I worked in a storage facility in the San Fernando Valley, which for many years was white suburbia, but and starting in about the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, far more groups started. Sort of the west side was white and the east side was Hispanic, and sort of started coming together in the center. But I would say now it's demographics. I haven't been there in quite some time, but I would say it's the demographics of the San Fernando Valley are gotta be plurality or majority Hispanic now.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically of the Hispanic group, we're talking Latin Americans for sure. But in this tiny little pocket in the eastern San Fernando Valley where I worked, surrounding it, well, maybe not surrounding it, but one border of it, I suppose, was a place where Filipinos came and settled. So several neighborhoods where they came and settled. And so there was a large Filipino population there too. And of course, Filipinos have a history with the Spanish as well as the Chinese, the Japanese, etc. It's a very multi-ethnic group of people. Rich history on those small islands. And this group of people, you would think, with a shared history of being, we'll say, forcibly colonized by the Spanish, and then sort of the United States took over, they really had a negative view of the Hispanic residents, a really negative view. So they saw what the rest of LA thought of Hispanics, which is sort of like the heel, which is awful. And they adopted that as they moved into these areas. And I saw a lot of people think that they were better. And it's an interesting dynamic, working in that place. And everybody always was like, oh, there's a white guy here. That's weird. But in any case, I kind of felt that. So back to my point about the Michael Peña's character, I felt that he was the brunt of the outgroup bias far more times than anyone else in the movie. I think he received it from multiple places. And never did anything to deserve it.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, he might be the one good person, though, quote unquote, right? Because I guess I overgeneralized earlier. But yeah, you're right. The tirade with Gene, he could have been angry about it if he just put the keys down and walked out. He always did his job with his head down. He'd really tried with the Persian man and, let him know that, well, he replaced the lock, but it was the door that's having problems. He documented it and then didn't even charge him for the lock. Then even when he was being almost robbed, was like, take the money, please, just don't harm me, just go, and still.
Yeah, now that I think about it, you're right. I don't think he has, maybe it was an interesting love letter. I take that back then. I mean, he does get the brunt of all of it, and I think that's historical. But even from I believe Paul Haggis is British. No, he's Canadian. Okay. Still. Not Angelino. So I do think there was that represents some sort of latent sort of implicit ideas that Los Angeles has about its lovely residents, Hispanic residents.
Right, but that's not what we experienced. Was different from what he experienced.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
And so, but if it's true that his character is not found to be at all in the wrong in any of these, then I think Paul Haggis had a goal for this character in mind.
Yeah, you're right. He And it definitely was maybe like he's kind of like, quote unquote, the victim of this outgroup bias, that he didn't deserve any of it. You know, and I think that that can be really a challenging, you know, assertion for all of us that are taking this into account, this film into our classes, or who are just simply watching it for fun. You know, where can we find these little nuggets of like, oh, okay, we had thought that there was no good character, and there actually was one.
Yeah. And you know, I love Michael Pena. Always. He's so good. And speaking of him coming back and playing a role as an LAPD officer in the film End of Watch, which is also really good, listeners. So you should go watch that. But bring tissues. So I wanted to end the episode here by pivoting to social psych, which is a course that I have actually used Crash in. I used it once. The first time I ever taught social psychology, this was at Marquette University in the spring of 2017. And it's the first time they had a emergency and they needed somebody to teach social. They had asked me to teach cog, and I was like, yeah, I can totally do that. And they're like, oh, can you do social too? And I'm like, sure, close enough. Because I had to, I as a graduate student, I did get to teach as the instructor of record social cognition. So yeah. I was like, yeah, I could get there. So I used Crash. So this was in my early formative years of just experimenting with films in my classes, and of course, look at me now. And so I used it, and my audience was largely white, being up in Milwaukee, largely white. And Milwaukee is one of the more segregated cities to still exist. So the segregation is still pretty heavy. There's a fairly solid line street between white and black neighborhoods in the city. I mean, it's obviously not segregated by actual law, but yeah, just the neighborhood lines, redlining, all that. Mm-hmm. Now the schools are still fairly segregated. So my students didn't necessarily get the idea of having this, because I think in 2017, they didn't know what was to come yet, I suppose. Maybe a little bit. Trayvon Martin had already occurred. Mm-hmm. Michael Brown. There was an incident the previous fall in Milwaukee regarding a black man and a police officer, but the police officer was black as well. So they had a little bit of it, but I don't think they fully got this one. I think because of what we talked about earlier in its controversy. And I think it stems from the topics you would use this film for, which I did select it for, which were things like overt racism, microaggressions, systemic racism, and institutional and systemic racism really weren't things on their radar. And I think that fell flat.
Yeah, I think sometimes we want this movie to be this kind of blinking light of like, look, some of this stuff happens. This wasn't just somebody's imagination that they just made up of people who are horribly racist and prejudiced. Like, you know, that there's these little nuggets of truth that people have experienced it. And maybe it would not have all experienced it just in this one city or in one day, because that's really what we have going on here. But that there are people out there, right, that have experienced this. And now we know it, especially with people using cell phones to record encounters. We see it much more often. And I think that has been hard to grapple with, you know, especially as somebody who's what, 20 years old, and especially people of color too. But being raised to always listen to police officers. They're supposed to be good guys. They're supposed to have your back. And now we've got this movie coming out of nowhere telling us that there might be problems with the system. Whoa, and then also this movie is like, it just seems like caricatures. Maybe I'm not going to take this as seriously. And so then we have to kind of just say, hey, students, let's have this conversation. Let's talk about why there could be hidden truths within this movie that is also imperfect, but can be used effectively.
Yeah, and I think that's the preface that this movie needs in a social psych course, specifically in a social psych course, because I think you can dissect some of the scenes if you just took the scene by scene and not have students watch the whole movie. In a cognition course, you could sort of dissect out the stereotypes here or there and just leave the rest of the narrative on the cutting room floor. But I think for a social psych course, you have to watch the whole thing in context.
Right.
And I think we did a pretty good job of naming all the various scenes. I think it's safe to say that the whole movie is just one social psych concept after another. And even though the movie came out in 2004, we're still talking about each of those vignettes. We're still harping on how they didn't say anything about Asian women and driving, and yet depicted it at the very somewhat opening of the movie. And then the idea of a white elected official who's going for re-election talking about this monolith of a black vote or this monolith of a law and order vote, and how the two things are seemingly antagonistic or at odds with each other. I thought that was, and you never hear from that character again.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And that's all we hear every election cycle is these blocks of voters, BLOC of voters that don't represent. And how many times in 2020 did we hear the Hispanic vote, and then somebody immediately coming in after them saying, like, we're not a monolith?
Yeah. Florida Hispanic individuals vote very differently from California Latinos, Oh my goodness.
And so, like, you have to take the whole thing and each one sort of go, okay, we can put this scene over here, and we can put this scene over here, and then just take those 2 or 3 chapters of a social psych textbook and just throw crash all over it. But there was one thing that I thought was interesting, and most social psych textbooks these days have a reducing prejudice chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it explains a lot, several strategies, both in the literature and sort of in practice and in an applied sense. And this film severely lacks any of that.
Yeah, and that's what we needed to really make this film a teachable moment, and I think one that would have been deserving of Best Picture. Would have been, wow, how do we face the music here?
Yeah, amen.
It's not enough to say that we're imperfect. I think that a lot of us know that, but how do we actually go about being, anti-racist?
Yeah, which is the way the conversation has shifted in the last few years. Yeah. And I think Ryan Phillippe's character tries to do that, but of course he falls victim to the same biases that many of us have. And acknowledging them is really my is my path toward being an ally, an anti-racist, and all of that. Is you got to first acknowledge them, and this is my message in my cognitive biases course. Is you got to acknowledge them first. If you don't know if they exist, if you don't know that they exist, or if they exist, or when they occur, then you're never going to be able to move past them, because they're going to be this silent puppet master controlling. And some people don't care to be controlled by their biases, but I care, so I'm gonna make the effort to do that. And I think you're right, this movie could have been a little bit better on that front.
Yes, and I think you're right, we care, and I think that's why, even with some of the challenges of this movie, it can be used to have tough conversations with our students. And for the most part, I think we're starting to see people who select into a psychology major that do care about these conversations. And that if they want to be a clinician, if they want to be a therapist, they have to care. It's in their code of ethics.
Exactly. And I want to thank Dr. Carina Malavanti for joining me to discuss Crash. Before we say goodbye, Carina, is there anything that you would like to plug? Where can folks find out more about what you do?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at K Malavanti and on Facebook in the Society for the Teaching of Psychology Facebook page. It's APA Division 2 if you're a psychology educator, or a psychology and buff psychology and film educator. Man, we would love to have conversations with you in that group.
Indeed.
I also usually attend STP's annual conference on teaching. It's virtual this year. We just found out today. But love making friends.
C'est la vie.
Yes.
Yes. And you also go to the Southwestern Psych Association stuff?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You should come back to the MPA. I'm just saying. Where is SPA usually held? Does it move around?
It does move around. But this next spring it's supposed to be in New Orleans. So we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Oh wow. I don't know.
I know. We have not heard anything this week, but who knows?
Well, I'm fingers crossing for you. And of course, we always give love to STP at the end of the show, because that's where all you lovely people come from on my list to chat with on movies. So thank you again.
Talking this stuff.
Carina, I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for this episode. Until the next episode, thanks for listening.